And in fact, the Vulcan, and I've forgotten the name of the Greek version, but the metallurgists of Greece and Rome were described as being disfigured. So it was a really big setback in that these very skilled people who produce this incredibly valuable substance, bronze, died off in the process of making it. And so the search for tin became incredibly important, and that's why the Minoans ended up in Cornwall to get the tin. It was like Cornish tin was very pure and very rich, and it was just lying on the surface. They could collect it in those days in the beds of streams. They didn't have to mine it even.
Okay, talk about the amber. Amber seems to have been highly, highly traded and regarded and protected.
Well, amber, nobody disputes that the amber in the Ullaburren wreck comes from the Baltic. Everyone accepts it does. Now, amber from the Baltic can be very easily identified, and that amber shows up all throughout the Minoan trading empire. For example, the graves at Stonehenge have this Baltic amber in big quantities. The graves in Mycenae in Greece have huge quantities of amber jewelry. Amber was very, very valuable, very highly regarded. Muhammad said all good Muslims should have their beads of pure amber. And the Roman emperors had special circuses where the successful gladiators would be thrown amber as presents if they killed the animals. So it's a very, very good fingerprint of the Minoan Atlantean trading empire. Where you find amber, that's where they were.
Where would you find amber today?
Same place, in the Baltic. It's washed up in the North Sea after a storm. We used to, for example, long ago we had a house in the marshes near the coast, and after Christmas lunch we used to stagger along to the coast to a place called Shingle Street, and we'd find amber every single time washed up from Baltic.
You've been so many places, Gavin. You've been to the Syrian border, to Damascus, to Beirut. You've been all over the world.
Very lucky. Very, very lucky. I mean, I've had prodigious luck. My first book, nobody would have bothered to read it, I think, 15 years ago, because China was sort of unknown quantity. But the fact that China is, becoming so powerful, people are very interested in ancient Chinese history. So that I was just spectacularly lucky with my first book.
Talk about Catherine Bard and her discovery of this cave in the desert.
Yes, well, this is very, very interesting because Catherine Bard has found a buried dockyard in Egypt. And in it, there are ropes and pieces of ship which have been dated to about 2000 BC, approximately. I'm not quite sure the exact dates, but anyway, very, very old. Now, the astonishing thing is that until recently, it was thought the Egyptians couldn't sail on the open ocean because their ships were made of pretty pathetic wood, basically. And she's found this is not the case at all. Well, the really interesting thing is that Emeritus Professor John Sorensen and Carl Johannesson have written two huge books in which they describe in great detail dozens and dozens of Egyptian voyages to the Americas, with, I think, accompanied by Minoan ships, in my view. So the fact that she's found what appear to be ocean-going ships, or the remains of them, is going to open a whole new Pandora's box about transatlantic voyages thousands and thousands of years ago. So Catherine Bard her discovery is very, very important.
One of the things I like about your work is that you honor and acknowledge all the people that are contributing to the body of work, to the projects, and that make up really the discovery teams.
It's very generous of you to say so, Kim, but it's self-interest, because if I didn't, the flood of new evidence flowing into our computers would disappear. And I hope people accept that I have always tried to acknowledge their work, and therefore they're happy to continue to provide really fascinating evidence.
Who are your greatest enemies or opposers?
I think there's a crackpot in the Far East whose name I've forgotten, but basically I've been accused of planting evidence where it'll be found, forging maps, siphoning off money from the Singapore Tourism Board, who didn't produce an exhibition on my book, and all sorts of fascinating crimes. But I've never replied to any of these attacks, which you may find rather conceited. But one of the problems I've got is that my books are on sale in over 100 countries, and I only speak one language, English. So if somebody attacks me in, say, Turkish or Chinese, I've got no real way of replying unless I hired interpreters. So I just ignore it. And I think what the critics don't understand is that the average man is exceedingly astute, or man or woman, the average reader, and they judge for themselves whether my evidence is good or not. And I think the overwhelming evidence we get from emails day in, day out, is that by and large, people accept in general what's written in the books. They don't necessarily accept all the details. So I haven't had to really reply to the critics.
Have you been invited to speak by universities across the world?
Oh, I have, yes. I've been invited to speak at the Library of Congress, in Washington, D.C., the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, the National Maritime Museum in London, and God knows how many other places across the world, and the Royal Geographical Society in London, and universities, Oxford, Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, and so on. So people have been very generous to invite me, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking there.
What does Gavin Menzies want to solve next?
Well, I'd like to write one book with my colleague Ian Hudson, which is about voyages long ago to the Americas. And I'd like to write a book with Professor Minos Sakritsis about Crete as the first civilization in the world. And then I'm going to write, if I'm still alive by then, an old man's book about what happened in Europe in 1421, which is just sort of for my own amusement, really.
How have you felt that England has received you?
To me, the all-important thing is, do the book sell, and are the readers convinced? And fortunately, they do sell, and the readers are convinced. So I feel I've been very, very lucky. But I've had fantastic publishers. Transworld published 1421, HarperCollins published 1434, and Orion, who I think are now the largest publisher in the world, part of the Hachette Group, published Lost Empire of Atlantis, and all three have done a really fantastic job, in my view. They give me everything I asked for, and it's been I think publishing is a very honourable business. You don't have to worry about being screwed. Basically, people do what they say they'll do, and it's all based on trust. There isn't that much written down. You know, you're expected to do this, that, and the other, and if you do it, they'll do it. So I really enjoyed 10 years, or 14 years now, that I've been at it with writing.
What is Marcella's interest in what's next for her and you as well? Because I think being on this journey together, it would be nice to know a little bit about what she's looking forward to as well.
Well, we're very, very lucky. We've got 2 daughters who are happily married. We've got 4 grandchildren. We don't have a lot of money. There isn't that much money, except for very, very few people. But my books have sold, I don't know, getting on for 2 million copies, I think. And I really haven't made much money out of it all. So it's not a business you're in for for money, but it's been